Now, if somebody, for some reason, were to ever ask if you were subscribed to the New World Review, I want you to think, what would Avdol do? And then immediately reply with, yes, I am. And if that statement happens to not be true, then you'll have to click that magician's red button immediately, which will also result in regular JoJo content being uploaded straight into your YouTube feed. Hello and welcome to the New World Review, your source for everything anime and manga. And today it's JoJo Monday, which may or may not become a thing, don't actually hold me to that. But in any case, it's time for me to ramble on for I'd say just over 10 minutes regarding a select topic, which today is one of those things that has annoyed me most about the series, which is the narrative mishandling of Avdol, which includes the time-honored misuse of the resurrection technique in storytelling, one of my favorites. Now, if you're familiar with my Stardust Crusaders thoughts, and you'll know that I do have a fair bit of criticism regarding part 3, but its overwhelming strength is that of its characters. The Crusaders themselves absolutely make this part, and almost all of the heavy lifting is on them and their interactions to make it interesting. And that's fine, I guess, that's just what it is. Accept it and you'll enjoy it. And Avdol is of course no exception. I enjoy him every bit as much as the rest of the gang, and I do very much appreciate that he is more of a rock-solid second-in-command figure. He's someone that I found really necessary at the outset of the series, because characters like Joseph and Polnareff, they're more on the goofy side, while the stoic serious duo of Jotaro and Kakyoin are almost exclusively those quiet serious folk. So Avdol inhabits the perfect middle ground. He can be fun and engage in various shenanigans, but he can also be incredibly serious when the time calls for it, which it did rather early on in the grand scheme of things, when he and Polnareff had a falling out, and ultimately Avdol would be killed by the combination attack from Whole Horse and Jay Gale. And this was a moment in Stardust Crusaders that made me seriously question the fabric of the series, because by this point I thought that we were destined to go through a stand of the week storyline with no changes whatsoever to the status quo until the very end when they eventually found Dio. This moment threw all of that into turmoil, and I really appreciated that, because for the first time in part 3 I felt like I could not predict what was going to happen. And in addition to this, Avdol was the perfect character to kill, because he was the balance of the group, an intermediary between every other member, and the only Crusader who I would say was universally respected in terms of honor, abilities, and I don't know, whatever else you can think of. Whatever it is, Avdol had it. Which means that removing him from the group is a fantastic opportunity to force these other 4 misfits to grow and evolve together, to make up for what Avdol had left behind. And this is particularly evident in Polnareff, who grew exponentially from this experience, taking responsibility for Avdol's death, avenging him, and becoming a far more mature being in general. Not only that, but this feeling of guilt would also plague Polnareff in a future arc, featuring cameo and the whole "hail to you" business. And up until now, I would say that everything was actually going rather well narratively, because I loved Avdol and his death hurt a lot. But if anyone did have to be killed for the sake of character growth of the others, then he was the prime candidate, and it worked. Polnareff in particular was now a fully fleshed out character, and by that point, by far my favorite in the series. And now if we were to hit the pause button, and you were to ask me at this stage the very simple question of what could have ruined everything that was built up so far, I would have had one very clear answer, and that would be bringing Avdol back to life. So of course, that's exactly what happened. And to be clear, I don't mean literally, I mean narratively. Avdol's situation was of course explained as such that he had never actually passed on, but the fact is that Araki did play this event as a death. Regardless of how it was retconned, that is what it was in terms of storytelling. And so his re-emergence into part 3 is a resurrection device being invoked. And this is one of the things that I despise most in all of fiction, because resurrection is almost always never used well. For every example I could give you of successfully playing out a character's death and then bringing them back into the story, I could find at least 10 other examples of a time where it was done very poorly and to the detriment of the entire series. And you know, I'll go to my beloved One Piece as a fantastic example of very, very poor resurrections. Eiichiro Oda is an absolute fiend for abusing this device, to the point where one character took a point-blank explosion intended to destroy an entire city and just turned up a couple of days later alive and well. Or for a non-anime example, if I go further back into my childhood, I can also recall Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where at the end of one season, season 5 I believe, Buffy sacrificed herself to save the world, as she does, only to be literally resurrected at the beginning of the next season. And there are a billion more examples, because I'm sure we've all experienced this device used en masse in our lifetimes, and you know what, feel free to state some of your own botched resurrections in the comments below. But let's add this Avdol situation into these 2 examples, because what do all 3 of these have in common? Well, firstly, in each and every case, they undermine the final action of the character involved. Belle from One Piece, Buffy, and Avdol all acted heroically in their final moments, and it puts a big dramatic full stop onto these events. They were powerful, they were emotional, and the sense of loss was profound. And in general, they were very well done pieces of storytelling. However, these three moments would all be retrospectively undermined by very poorly handled decisions, which was the desire to bring these characters back into the series. Now, because I've mentioned it, I should say that the Buffy example is the most understandable and probably the most well done of the selection. I mean, she was the main character after all, and there was a grand sense of consequence from reviving her, which took an entire season to get over. It left lasting damage, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and that is one of the better ways that you can handle the resurrection. With Avdol though, there was none of that. It was complete 100% schlock. Araki decided to bring him back one day, and then found himself having to reverse this wonderfully crafted death, and the very fact that Avdol ends up being alive negates all of the emotion we underwent during that scene. And to be perfectly frank, it's kind of insulting to the audience, which I felt through Polnareff when he was so happy to have Avdol alive, as was I by the way. He's a great character, but doing it in such a haphazard way and having Joseph, Jotaro and Kakyoin all just going, yeah, we knew that all along bruh, is pretty rubbish and very much like a slap in the face. And here I should probably address some talk on the internet that I've stumbled upon regarding this situation, which is that Avdol was brought back because of fan backlash, or even that Avdol was killed because Araki intended on having Whole Horse join the Crusaders, which is an interesting but unsubstantiated idea other than this one picture, which in context makes all the sense in the world because it appeared during the arc when Whole Horse and the Crusaders sort of incidentally, I guess accidentally teamed up to fight Enya. Other than that, I've never been able to find anything but pure fan speculation on that idea. Now what we do have though is a statement from Araki regarding Avdol from volume 13 of the JoJonium, which is extremely enlightening, and it goes a little something like this. I killed him once in India because I'm always trying to keep readers from getting bored with the same pattern. I also wanted to add some reality to the story by having someone get sacrificed. I thought it'd be great to add in an episode where they lose a team member. I didn't intend to erase him forever though, but I thought it'd be too easy if he came back to life immediately, so I wanted to prepare a flashy comeback that readers would be able to accept. When I draw JoJo, I never plan out the small things. In the end, I managed to bring Avdol back just before they reached Egypt, but I never planned that beforehand. It was just an idea that came to me while drawing. Now that I think back on it, since I killed him once, I probably should have made him more important in the story. Of course, these thoughts all come to me after I've already finished the story. So I think that makes things pretty unfortunately clear. Araki wanted to have the exact effect that I did feel, which was breaking the part 3 formula and adding some nice unpredictability into the series. The thing that does kind of flat out shock me though, is that Araki never intended to leave Avdol dead. So everything that happened here was Araki's planning to some degree. It wasn't an accident or a sudden realization that he had to work Avdol back into the story. No, this was actually all intentional, and I think that's very telling of Araki's storytelling ability in the early days of JoJo, because in my opinion this was completely botched, and Araki would seem to concur with that assessment. And with that, I do also need to stress that this is not the end of the Avdol problem. A crappy resurrection is, look, it's not great, but it is manageable if that resurrection has a purpose. Like in the Buffy example once again, she was needed to helm the series. There is no Buffy the Vampire Slayer without Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and she would be the key to a further 2 seasons of that series. But in contrast, Avdol would go on to do, well, nothing at all. And nothing might be a bit harsh because Avdol in the second half of the series was still highly enjoyable and he fit the ensemble very well, but it's so hard to think of any reason, other than liking the character, to have him incorporated into this story once again. And Araki agrees with this as well, because he even admitted that if he was going to do such a thing, then at the very least Avdol should have had some sort of pivotal role to play, because if you are going to compromise your storytelling like that, then it had better be for a pretty damn good reason. And in that case, that reason was absolutely absent. But for one final candle on this Avdol cake, after having a powerful, emotional death and a joy-filled resurrection, which, you know, feel what you will about that, but Avdol's ultimate fate was simply to die again. And not just die again, but actually perish in one of the most underwhelming ways possible at the hands of Vanilla Ice. And here is where I just kind of lost it. For the longest time, I actually did not believe that Avdol was dead, because after everything we'd been through with this character, I was certain that his ultimate purpose was not to just vanish from existence, leaving only a pair of hands behind. But here's what's worse. When it became clear that, oh, this is actually serious. I mean, Avdol he's actually dead. And in response to that thought, I felt nothing at all. And why was that? Well, because I've already experienced this situation once, and very recently as well. And in addition to that, in a much more well done death scene, it actually made me feel for both Avdol and Polnareff. But by the time we reached Avdol's actual death, there was no emotion left to give. Araki had already played that card, and it was never going to be possible to generate a similar reaction, especially with the abilities of Vanilla Ice. I cannot stress that enough. In the first Avdol quote-unquote death, it was a visceral depiction of him being struck in the head, and his seemingly lifeless corpse was on display for his allies and the audience to see. It was tangible and it was hard-hitting. But with Vanilla Ice, that was the exact opposite. It was an instantaneous vanishing from the world, and other than the words of the characters and some hands, there was no tangible evidence of the death for the audience to latch onto. Because yeah, sure, Avdol lost parts of his arms, but characters in JoJo have lost body parts before and have been perfectly fine afterwards. So for all intents and purposes, Avdol just vanished from the story. It almost feels as if Araki just decided to stop drawing him one day and that was that. And obviously that's not what happened, but this is the most underwhelming ending possible to a character that the author went so far out of their way to resurrect. So in the end, I can't help but think, what was the point of all of this? If that's all there was to Avdol, then why not just leave him dead or just don't kill him in the first place? Save it for the encounter with Vanilla Ice so that it can actually have that intended permanent effect. What this displays to me is a distinct lack of planning and narrative instinct that will forever plague my overall impression of Avdol, a character who for all intents and purposes should be nothing but amazing. And I really did enjoy his parts of the story, both pre and post resurrection, but I don't think that in the end, these bits of fun were worth the crazy mental gymnastics that Araki had to engage in simply to bring him back. And obviously this is all a very, I guess, a first world problem, shall we say, because whilst looking into this, I have found plenty of other people who just don't care whatsoever about the technical and dramatic implications of these events, and to them I say, you are probably Araki's perfect audience, and I am genuinely thrilled that you enjoyed it. For people like me though, this problem is like a haunting specter over part 3 of JoJo. I just don't understand how a professional storyteller can get themselves into a situation like this. And it sounds an awful lot to me like a kick the can problem. You know, you'll deal with it when you encounter it down the road, which never ever works out well. But either way, it is what it is. I've said my piece, and now I'm done. So that pretty much does it for this discussion on the Avdol problem. So what do you guys think? Please do feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, or even join my Discord server. And if you're keen for more JoJo content, then please do check out some of my other videos, or even subscribe to the channel for regular JoJo wonder, much of which is far more positive than this video, delivered straight to your YouTube feed. This has been the New World Review, and I'll see you next time.